But the Catholic faith has always been part of the American story. The first Christian service on our soil was a Catholic Mass.
Many of you have probably seen the recent video of Marco Rubio highlighting the Catholic roots of American history, specifically the remarkable fact that the very first religious event on American soil was a Catholic Mass celebrated by the Spanish explorers. I must admit, when I first came across this, I was genuinely taken aback because most of us are raised with the impression that American religious history begins and ends with the Protestant influence of the early British colonies. Yet the historical record tells a far older and richer story, one in which Spanish Catholic missionaries had already been planting the faith on American soil long before the British ever arrived. It is a captivating and largely overlooked chapter of history. So let us hear it directly from Marco Rubio himself and then unpack it together. Let's listen.
In 1895, Pope Leo XIII penned an encyclical to the Catholic Church in the United States. All intelligent men are agreed, he wrote, that America seems destined for greater things. Now it is our wish that the Catholic Church should not only share in, but help to bring about this prospective greatness. But as the Holy Father noted, the Church had already been here from the start. 4 centuries prior, one Catholic explorer ventured out into the great unknown and returned home with the story, as he wrote in one letter, of a land more richly endowed than I know or am able to say. Few moments in history have carried more consequence. Christopher Columbus renewed the West's confidence in itself and launched that great age of discovery, exploration, and expansion from which America was born. Some have claimed that the Catholic faith is a foreign import to our country. Only one of the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence was Catholic. Charles Carroll of Maryland, for whom one of this conference's hosts is named. Just 2 Catholic names appear on our Constitution itself. But the Catholic faith has always been part of the American story. The first Christian service on our soil was a Catholic Mass. The oldest permanent settlement in the United States is the town of St. Augustine, planted by Spanish Catholics on the coastal sands of my home state of Florida. Catholic saints were martyred on American soil well over a century before the Revolution began. In missions and settlements, wilderness forts, and trading posts stretching from the first colonies to the distant frontier, Catholic explorers, soldiers, priests, and pioneers consecrated this new world to their ancient faith and christened its land with Catholic names. Maryland, St. Louis, San Francisco, Santa Fe, almost every region of what is now the United States was first explored and mapped by Catholics. This is no coincidence. Christianity taught the West to think in continents and centuries rather than villages and seasons. The Church calls us, as Christ told St. Peter, to duc al altum, to put out into the deep. Catholics across time have answered the call, from the forests of pagan Europe to the wilderness of North America, to bring new worlds to Christ. This is the inheritance which has shaped our pioneer nation, the spirit of expansion and discovery which would conquer continents, unlock the mysteries of the universe, and eventually transcend the limits of Earth itself. It is the same spirit that led 56 Americans to pledge their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor to each other in the cause of independence 2.5 centuries ago. Catholics in the colonies flocked to join them, enlisting to fight for the Patriots at a rate far exceeding their share of the population. In 1790, George Washington wrote to the Roman Catholics of America to thank them personally for the patriotic part which you took in the accomplishments of the Revolution. It is popular today to claim the founding was merely a brainchild of the Enlightenment, but the Revolution was not a radical rupture with the past. It was a renewal of an older inheritance, fitted to the unique experience of a free Christian people in the New World. That inheritance draws upon the ancient liberties of the English Constitution and common law, but it roots these traditions upon a fixed and unchanging moral order, governed by the laws of nature and nature's God. This fundamental truth endows man with not just rights, but with duties. It conceives of freedom and virtue as inseparably linked. We see this in the structure of our political order itself, built not to sanction license, but to restrain passion, check ambition with ambition, and secure the common good. Now, it is true, of course, that most of the men who wrote our founding documents were not Catholics themselves, but the system that gave us belongs to the same civilizational tradition that produced the towering cathedrals of Rome and the philosophy of Augustine and Aquinas. America was a gift where the church and the civilization it made was reborn, discovering itself anew in the wilderness. It is at once modern and ancient. The men who settled and founded our country were the architects of a great rebirth, renewing the deferred dreams of the old world in the possibilities of a virgin continent. It has been 250 years since a new people declared themselves to the world. At the time, less than 2% were Catholic, but the nation they built would come to serve as one of the proudest and most enduring testaments to the eternal truth of our faith. To look upon the history of this golden land is to see the face of God.
Adding to what Marco Rubio shared, when the Spanish explorers set sail for the New World in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, they did not come alone. They brought Catholic priests and missionaries as an essential part of every expedition. It began with Christopher Columbus himself, who arrived in 1892 as a deeply devout Catholic, naming the first island he landed on San Salvador, meaning Holy Savior, and immediately offering a prayer of thanksgiving. The Franciscan, Dominican, and Jesuit religious orders followed, establishing missions across Florida and deep into the interior of the continent. The Jesuits, in particular known as the Black Robes by native peoples, pushed into Canada, the Great Lakes, and the Mississippi River Valley, with men like St. Isaac Joes giving their lives as martyrs on American soil. By 1565, the Spanish had founded St. Augustine, Florida, the oldest continuously occupied European settlement in North America, where a Mass of Thanksgiving was celebrated on the very day the settlers came ashore. Further west, the Franciscan friar, Blessed Junipero Serra, established a chain of 21 Catholic missions along the California coast, laying the foundation for cities like San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, all bearing the names of Catholic saints. So the story of Catholicism in America is not a footnote. It is the opening chapter written in the prayers, sacrifices, and missions of those who arrived long before the United States ever existed. In the next clip, Bishop Barron speaks about the rich Christian heritage that helped shape the founding of America. Let's listen.
Friends, Abraham Lincoln carefully added the phrase, "under God," to the Gettysburg Address as he delivered it, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. Now we know this because the earliest written versions prepared in advance don't have that phrase. So what was it that prompted our greatest president to add these words at so decisive a moment? Was it merely a sort of pious ornament, or did it signal something of central importance? I believe Lincoln intuited, even as he gave his most significant speech, that this theological addition was crucial to the argument he was making. He knew that God is essential to any coherent account of democracy, freedom, and equality. On this great 250th anniversary of our country's founding, I'd like to reflect just a little bit on this relationship between belief in God and our democracy. Let's look first at the great American principle of equality. Through that famous phrase, 77 years ago, Lincoln directs us back to the summer of 1776, when Thomas Jefferson wrote those famous words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." Friends, we hear those words so often we can miss their distinctiveness, even their strangeness. In what sense, precisely, are all people equal? We're plainly unequal in size, intelligence, creativity, beauty, energy, moral virtue, etc. And for the classical philosophers, for Plato and for Aristotle, the recognition of these differences is the key to the establishment of a right social order. For Plato, only a handful of specially gifted people are capable of government. And for Aristotle, most people are suited either for slavery or what he called the private life. If you had suggested to Plato or Aristotle that all people are equal, they would have laughed at you. So what changed? Though our founding fathers were indeed influenced by classical philosophy, they were also heirs to another great tradition, namely the Bible. And Jefferson gives away the game in that single word, created. What the founders knew from their Christian formation is that all people, despite their enormous inequalities, are equally children of God and therefore equal in dignity. Take God out of the equation and equality quickly disappears. But when equality is grounded in a creator, it becomes enduring and universal. Friends, our nation was conceived, Lincoln told us, in that conviction, and we were fighting the Civil War to defend it. But God granted us more than equality. Jefferson wrote that all people are, quote, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This, too, is a strange and remarkable claim. In the ancient world, rights were granted to some, denied to almost everybody else. But the founders insisted that rights don't come from the government, they don't come from majority vote, they come from God, and therefore they belong to everyone. No, we should applaud that. It's so basic to our democracy. Because listen, if rights came from the government or from the majority consensus, they could be rescinded. And of course, this very denial of rights has been on vivid display in numerous countries in the last 100 years. And it should not be surprising that these were precisely countries that denied the existence of God. But let's focus further on a particular right that Lincoln highlighted at Gettysburg, namely liberty. We are indeed the land of the free. We have a Liberty Bell. We revere a Declaration of Independence. The highest civilian honor the president can bestow is a Medal of Freedom, etc. But why is freedom so important to us? Here's why. It's essential to human dignity. Nobody wants to be under the boot of somebody else. Nobody wants to be oppressed, put down, ignored, bossed around. And if everyone has the dignity of a child of God, then everyone has a right to this freedom. But there's more. Freedom, I would say now as a biblical person, makes love possible. And love is what makes us fully alive. The great statesman and saint Thomas More said, I'm quoting now, Thomas More, all right. More said, God made the plants for their simplicity and the animals for their innocence, but man he made to serve him wittily in the tangle of his mind. He could have added, and in the complex decisions of his will. See, God could have made us robots or marionettes, but robots and marionettes are incapable of love. If you're forced to love, you're not really loving. Freedom is required for this. Now, at this point, everybody, we have to face an objection, and you hear it in some of the modern philosophers. Wouldn't belief in God be, in fact, the greatest threat to our freedom? If God is brooding over our lives and giving us laws and regulations, isn't that an affront to our freedom? The answer is no, but it depends upon a key distinction between what I would call the freedom of indifference. This is the liberty to decide and simply on the basis of my own choice what I'm going to be, what I'm going to do. It's arbitrary freedom, freedom of choice. It dominates the consciousness of many people today. But listen, in the Bible, in the great classical tradition, and in the founders of our country, freedom had a very different sense. I'll call it freedom for excellence. This is not merely the liberty to choose, but rather the disciplining of desire, so as to make the achievement of the good first possible and then effortless. Now here's what I mean. Think of the freedom of a skilled musician, able to play whatever he wants. Think of the freedom of the fluent speaker of a language, able to say whatever he wants. This is not the result of choosing whatever I want, but rather of internalizing the laws of language, the laws of the musical instrument so fully that they become second nature. On that first reading of freedom, freedom as choice, law appears indeed as a burden. But on the second reading, law is the friend of freedom, for it shapes desire in accord with the good. Might I submit to you, this is the kind of freedom that the founders are talking about. This is the freedom that Lincoln is extolling, and for the rebirth of which he is calling. Remember in the prologue to the Declaration, Jefferson referenced, quote, "the laws of nature and of nature's God." Can we see how Jefferson's reference to law is perfectly congruent with his emphasis on freedom, once we understand the kind of freedom Jefferson is talking about? What are the laws of nature to which he refers? It's this very ancient idea that there are moral principles embedded in our nature, truths that we discover and not invent, life and friendship, art, play, knowledge, religion, etc. And these, everybody, are the goods that inform and order our freedom. Where do they come from? They come, Thomas Jefferson insists, from nature's God. There's an eternal law that stands above the human law, grounding it and giving it legitimacy. Now, may I say, this principle found one of its most powerful expressions in the life of Martin Luther King Jr. Writing from the Birmingham City Jail, where he was incarcerated, King addressed critics who questioned his willingness to break certain laws. He said he couldn't delay in his protest, for he was fighting against unjust laws, which finally amount to an affront against God. Listen to what he says now in that famous letter from the Birmingham City Jail. I'm quoting King. "One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of law, just and unjust. I'd be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws." But then King contrasts this with obedience to an unjust law. I'm quoting again. "Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine. An unjust law is no law at all," close quote. And in clarifying this difference further, King turns to my spiritual hero, the great St. Thomas Aquinas. Here's King again. "A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that's out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law," close quote. Now, everybody, what could be more American than that, and what could be more traditionally religious than that? In the mind of Martin Luther King, those two were not at odds with each other. They were congruent. And I would say, as we reflect on our history, from the founding, through the trials of the Civil War, to the struggle for civil rights, we can see this consistent thread, the conviction that human dignity, equality, rights, freedom, and the rule of law are all grounded in God. Now, by way of conclusion, I know it's been mentioned often, but I believe it bears repeating. There's an enormous difference between the French and the American revolutions. Both were events at the end of the 18th century. Both were conditioned by the Enlightenment. But whereas the French Revolution involved a break with religion and overt hostility to religious institutions, the American Revolution did not. Whereas the French Revolution deified human reason, the American Revolution did not. The revolutionaries in Paris turned Notre Dame Cathedral into a temple of reason, elevating human judgment above all else. But the American revolutionaries, almost to a man, were shaped by biblical convictions. They did not replace God with reason, but they grounded reason itself in God's order. Friends, because we are under God, we can hold fast to the foundation of our freedom, the equality in which we were created, the source of our rights, and the justice of our laws. Because we are under God, we can look to the next 250 years with confidence. And this is precisely why I can stand on this National Mall today as both a proud Catholic bishop and a proud American citizen and say, God bless the United States of America. And God bless you all. Thanks.
As Bishop Barron rightly points out, the rights enshrined in the Constitution of the United States were not invented by politicians or philosophers. They were recognized by men who were deeply formed by a Christian worldview. The founding fathers understood that certain rights are inalienable, not because the government declared them so, but because God himself is their origin and guarantor. The conviction is written into the very soul of the nation. It is the explicit and unapologetic language of the Declaration of Independence, which proclaims that all men are endowed by their Creator with rights that no earthly power can legitimately take away. Consider what this means in practice. It is why you cannot torture a prisoner because he bears the image of God. It is why you cannot silence a person's conscience because that conscience answers first to God, not to the state. It is why a mother's right to raise her children in the faith cannot be voted away by parliamentary majority because that right does not belong to the government to give or take. These are not abstract theological ideas. They are lived convictions that shape the entire American legal tradition. Now, remove God from the equation, however, everything changes. Without a divine anchor, rights become nothing more than privileges, things that state generously grants today and quietly revokes tomorrow. We have already seen this happen throughout history. Governments that rejected a God-given foundation for human dignity, such as the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, did not stop at restricting rights. They systematically destroyed them because without God, there is no higher authority to answer to. When the state becomes the highest power, the citizens become entirely at its mercy. This is why we must be deeply grateful for the Christian foundation of the United States, a foundation that has made this nation, for all its imperfections, a beacon of hope for the rest of the world. That foundation was not an accident. It was the fruit of faith, Catholic and Christian, planted on American soil long before the nation ever had a name. I hope this video was helpful. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. God bless you.